As well as my work at CYM, I work as a teacher in a school, and one of the things that I'm expected to do in that school is put at the start of a lesson the learning objectives, the things I want the young people in that classroom to know by the end of the hour I've spent with them. And learning objectives are really important. Whether you're a teacher or whether you're a youth worker, we all want to do the same thing. We want young people to learn things. The trouble is, we don't always know how we can get every child in that group or in that classroom to reach those learning objectives. So what do you see when you see your young people in a group? You see a group of young people who are like empty vessels, and you've got all the information that you just want to pour into them. Because if you do see like that, then you're subject to the criticism that Paulo Freire came up with, which said this banking system of education, which sees everybody as an empty vessel needing to have stuff poured into them, is redundant, because it doesn't accept or respect the fact that there are individual learners in that group who not only have things they can learn, but things they can teach the teacher. Martin Buber, the Jewish philosopher and theorist, he talked about the need for education to be done through conversation and dialogue. He talked about introducing the concept of I and thou, that sense of respect and value for the people you're talking to and listening to. And so Buber introduced that idea, and by doing so he showed the respect for each individual he was with. So how do we teach our learning objectives, reach our learning objectives in a group of people who've got lots and lots of different learning needs? Honey and Mumford very helpfully put this together in categorising 4 learning styles that we as educators need to use in order to reach the needs of the many young people we'll be working with day in and day out. They identified 4, but I think there are sometimes more than these 4 and sometimes combinations of these 4, but in principle these are the 4. Firstly, there's the theorist, and that would be a person like me, a person who likes to learn by reading, by listening, by thinking of the words, by reflecting on those in all kinds of different ways, but basically they learn through that process. And theorists are the sort of learners that classrooms of yesterday, Victorian classrooms, were set up to meet the needs of. But they're not the only learning style. So we have a group of people called activists, and they're the people who learn by doing something. You could tell them all day how to ride a bicycle, you could tell them all day how to plan a computer program, you could tell them all day about history or poverty or whatever it is you're trying to teach, but until they actually do the lesson themselves, it won't mean anything to them. Then there are reflectors, people who will hear what is said or do and understand something but needs to go away to actually make that lesson real for them. They need to reflect on it. The favourite phrase most of the reflective people I know use is just need to think about that, if that's okay. I'll come back next week, I'll tell you what I think next week, those sort of things. And the 4th group of people that were identified by Honey and Mumford were called pragmatists. They asked the question, well, how does that work then? How can I make that happen? What's going on here? A really good example from the life of Jesus is when Jesus is talking about praying, there's a group of disciples who come to him and say, well, how does prayer work? Teach us how to pray. And Jesus teaches them the Lord's Prayer. And through that process, the pragmatists there begin to understand how prayer works. And that's the great thing about Jesus. 2,000 years ago, he had a group of disciples and a learning objective for them. He needed them to become the church at the end of 3 years. And he taught those disciples, that disparate group of people, in all kinds of different ways in order to meet those learning objectives. So he sent them on mission, and those who were activists understood what mission was. He taught them in the Sermon on the Mount and other situations. He got people to go fishing, and as they were fishing, to think about what was going on. He taught people how to pray and how to appreciate being on their own. And all those different things we've been thinking about, Jesus understood and recognised 2,000 years ago. And if we don't recognise them today, if we don't employ our skills as youth workers and leaders to meet the learning styles of the people we're working with, then we're failing them. But perhaps of all the theorists that I've come across, the one that means most to me, I think, is Howard Gardner and his theory of multiple intelligences. I work in a school where intelligence is measured by a person's ability to meet the criteria of A-star grades to C in a limited number of GCSE subjects. And people who don't meet that criteria are labelled as stupid or failure or unintelligent. And Gardner says that is just so wrong, because intelligence comes in all sorts of different forms. Very similar in a sense to Honey and Mumford. So you can have people who are linguistically intelligent, who are good with words. And probably that's my greatest strength myself. I'm involved in drama, I love reading, I love speaking and acting, all of those things are really important to me. So maybe that's my area of intelligence. But there's a sort of social intelligence Gardner identifies as well, and a visual intelligence and a physical intelligence. And I'm rubbish at certain things. I'm rubbish at PE, and I'm not very good at art, and I'm not very good at music, and all these are different areas, Gardner says, are areas of different intelligence. So I've got a daughter, Joanna, who failed every single GCSE she took, and yet is working in a care home and seen as incredibly good at social skills and her ability to relate to people. And she's a genius at that, whereas I'm a complete dunce. She is intelligent in that area. And as a youth leader and as a youth worker, do I know where the intelligences are of my young people? Do I know what they're good at, how they learn, and what they excel at?
I'm not necessarily the most scientifically genius person, but that doesn't mean I'm thick, it doesn't mean I'm stupid. There are things that I can be good at, they're just not necessarily what the world might term a genius.
A writer called Helen Nola, when commissioned by the Australian government to look at how can they improve standards, said you need to increase a person's sense of belonging in a school or in a college. And the best way to do that is by recognising the gifts that they have and valuing those gifts and helping the young person use those gifts to contribute to the wider community. So a young person who may not be particularly brilliant at English or maths, but who is an amazing musician, should be allowed to use their musical gift for the good of the whole community. Recognising that gift and valuing it will then make that young person feel they have a sense of belonging, a sense of value, a sense of worth, a place in that community, and will therefore learn better. It's a really important and it's a fascinating theory as well. So Nola's idea of belonging based on gifts and Gardner's idea of multiple intelligences are really great theories to get your head around, but they're not new. Paul the Apostle, in writing in 1 Corinthians, talks about how not everyone is an apostle, not everyone is a prophet, not everyone is a preacher. And he talks about the different gifts that the Holy Spirit brings and the Holy Spirit uses for the good of all in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Recognising that these theories have their roots in biblical teaching, knowing that this is the way that Jesus and the early church worked, should give us confidence to take these theories, apply them, and use them in the youth work we're doing to ensure that every young person has a chance to meet the learning objectives we're setting for them.